He saw his ex holding a baby at the airport, then realized the child was his. What followed wasn't just a reunion, but a battle to earn the right to be a father. From midnight fevers to first words, this is a story about redemption, trust, and the power of showing up when it matters most. Where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories that will stay with you long after they end. I wasn't supposed to be at the airport that day. My flight to San Francisco had been delayed 3 hours, and I just wrapped another conference that left me feeling more hollow than proud. The keynote was well received. Standing ovation, press interviews, a spike in LinkedIn followers, but all I wanted was silence. Not applause. Not another hotel room. I was halfway through my second espresso, standing at the tall windows overlooking the tarmac, when I saw her. Naomi Carter. And she wasn't alone. There was a baby in her arms. A little girl, maybe a year old, resting against Naomi's chest like she belonged there. The child's tiny hand was curled around the edge of Naomi's hoodie. And for some reason, that simple image knocked the breath clean out of me. I would have known that curve of an eyebrow anywhere. At first, my brain did what brains do when faced with the impossible. It rejected the information. No, couldn't be. It was just coincidence. Genetics. But something in my chest stirred. Something deeper than logic. The baby looked like me. Naomi hadn't seen me yet. She was too busy calming the little girl, adjusting her blanket, murmuring something soft and rhythmic. Her dark eyes moved constantly, scanning the crowded gate area. She looked tired, like she hadn't had a full night's sleep in a year. But she also looked strong, grounded in a way I didn't remember, like motherhood had carved something solid into her. And me? I was frozen. My name's Graham Ellis, by the way. 36. CEO. Product architect. Investor. I've spent my life building things. Companies, platforms, brands. But in that moment, staring across a terminal at the woman I'd once loved and the child I'd never met, I realized I'd never built a damn thing that mattered. I started walking before I fully understood why. My feet moved on instinct, the way they do when a fire alarm goes off or when you hear someone scream your name. Except no one was calling me. Not yet. Not her. Not the baby. But something in my body knew that I was standing on the edge of something irreversible. 20 steps. That's how far I was from her. She looked up. Our eyes met. Everything stopped. Naomi didn't flinch, didn't run. She just stared. Her mouth opened slightly, and I saw something shift behind her eyes. Not shock, not even anger. Just resignation. Like she'd imagined this moment 100 times and still wasn't ready. I stopped a few feet away, my heart punching against my ribs. I looked at the baby. She was dozing lightly, lips pressed together, tiny lashes fluttering against caramel skin. And those eyes. God help me, those eyes were mine. Deep set, almond-shaped, with the same little crinkle at the outer edge. I swallowed hard. Naomi? She said my name like it tasted like something she'd forgotten was bitter. Graham. I nodded at the child. She's? Naomi's lips tightened. Her name is Mira. Mira. Latin for wonder. My knees buckled slightly. I stared at the baby again, then back at Naomi. How old is she? 13 months. 13. Do the math, Graham. Think back to the last time you saw her. The fight, the suitcase, the door slamming behind you. I remembered. I didn't know, I said. You didn't tell me. Naomi blinked slowly. I tried. I could barely hear her over the blood rushing in my ears. I called 17 times, she continued, voice low and steady. I showed up once. Your assistant turned me away. Security wouldn't let me in without an appointment. You changed your number. I got the message. I remembered that too. Those first few weeks after we broke up, I'd shut down every open door, burned the bridge, told myself I needed the distance to heal. I didn't realize I was amputating a whole damn limb. Mira stirred and made a soft little sound, like a kitten waking up. Her eyes fluttered open, blinking slowly. Then she looked at me. And looked. Something primal happened inside my chest. I had never known a person for less than 5 seconds and loved them this completely. She does that with everyone, Naomi said quickly, but her voice caught on the lie. I saw the truth in her eyes. I saw her brace herself. Mira reached for me. Little hands, open and innocent, stretched toward the man she'd never met, toward me. Her father. Naomi's entire body tensed. She turned slightly away, protective, unsure. The loudspeaker called final boarding for Flight 447 to Lisbon. Naomi exhaled and stood, Her diaper bag was heavy on her shoulder. Mira clung to her, babbling. Naomi reached for her boarding passes with one hand, her movements jerky, rushed. "You're leaving," I said. "Yes." "You can't." It came out raw, desperate, unplanned. Naomi looked at me like I was a stranger asking for a favor I didn't deserve. "I have to." "Please, just wait, 5 minutes." She hesitated. For the first time her armor cracked. She glanced at Mira, then at me. Something flickered in her face. "5 minutes," she whispered. "That's what you get." And just like that, the rest of the terminal disappeared. The flight, the crowd, the chaos, it all blurred into nothing. There was only the three of us, the woman I'd hurt, the daughter I didn't know I had. And 5 stolen minutes to prove I wasn't the man who'd walked away. Mira reached again, tiny fingers curling. I stepped closer. My hands shook as I touched her for the first time. She giggled, a sound like wind chimes in spring. Then she pressed one palm against my chest, right over my heart. And for the first time in years, I felt it beat for something real. She was still holding Mira when I remembered the last time I held anything that mattered. It was a suitcase. Naomi had been standing in the doorway of my apartment, barefoot, mascara smudged from crying. Her voice had been low, not yelling, never yelling, but she was pleading. "Graham, don't go. Just stay. Talk to me, please." And I'd walked out anyway, told myself I was doing her a favor, told myself I wasn't ready for commitment, for domestic life, for the kind of love that wanted more than I could give. It was easier to leave than admit I was afraid. Afraid of being ordinary. Afraid of being needed. Afraid of failing at the one thing that couldn't be optimized, pivoted, or scaled. I flew to Hong Kong the next morning. Now 13 months later, she was here, with a daughter who looked just like me. Mira's little hand rested on Naomi's collarbone, as if it belonged there. And Naomi was no longer the woman standing in my apartment doorway. She was stronger now. Sharper. She looked like someone who had fought every day for over a year and won just enough battles to keep going. I had no idea what those battles were, but I was about to find out. Naomi shifted Mira on her hip and sighed. "You want to know what happened? Why you didn't know? Why I didn't tell you?" "I do," I said. "I need to." She looked at me for a long moment, like she was deciding whether I could handle the truth, whether it was worth unearthing everything she'd buried. "You left," she said simply. "You chose your career. You chose distance. And I get it. Really, I do. You never lied about who you were. I just didn't think you'd walk out knowing I was." She stopped, tightened her jaw, then inhaled slowly. "I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after you left." The words were soft, but they hit like bricks. I gripped the back of the airport bench, steadying myself. "I was scared," she said, her voice dropping. "Terrified. But I also knew. I knew she wasn't a mistake. She was mine. Ours." I thought, maybe if you knew, you'd come back. Maybe you just needed a reason. I looked away, ashamed. My brain started scanning for excuses, my assistant screening calls, my change in number, my speaking tour schedule. But I knew better than to say them out loud. She wasn't looking for excuses. She wanted accountability. "I called your office, left messages, sent emails. Your assistant replied once. Mr. Ellis is currently unavailable due to international travel obligations." After that, radio silence. I showed up at your building. The front desk said no guests without appointments. I was 9 weeks pregnant, standing in your lobby with a hand on my stomach and tears in my eyes. Security asked me to leave. I felt sick. I thought about going to your parents, but what was I going to say? "Hey, remember me? Your son's ex? I'm pregnant and he won't take my calls." You were untouchable. The more successful you got, the harder it was to find you. "I didn't know," I whispered. "I swear to God, Naomi, I didn't know." Her expression didn't change, but you made sure not to know. There it was. She wasn't wrong. In the months after our breakup, I'd built a wall. A fortress, really. Out of ambition, out of fear. I told my assistant to block personal calls. I muted every reminder of our life together. I buried myself in startups and stock options and never looked back. Until now. Mira started to fuss again, and Naomi reached into her diaper bag for a pacifier, but the baby turned her face toward me, arms reaching. That instinct, that tiny gesture, broke something open inside me. "She reaches for people sometimes," Naomi said, trying to sound casual, but her voice cracked. "But not like this." "She's beautiful," I said. Naomi's posture softened just barely. "She's smart, stubborn. She loves sweet potatoes and hates the car seat. She claps when she hears the Beatles, and she won't sleep unless I hum to her. I want to know all of it, I said. Everything. I've missed too much already. Naomi's lips parted, surprised. Then she nodded once, tight and reluctant, like she wanted to believe me but had learned not to trust too quickly. You can start by explaining what changed, she said. Why you're standing here now, when you couldn't be bothered to pick up the phone back then. I thought about lying, about telling her I'd matured or healed or figured myself out, but none of that felt right. The truth was uglier. I was afraid, I said. Afraid of messing it up, afraid of being my father. Naomi's brows furrowed. My dad left when I was 8, I explained. One day he was there, tall, charming, the guy who built tree houses and fixed broken bikes. Then he wasn't, just gone. I watched my mom unravel trying to hold things together, and I swore I'd never do that to anyone. So you did it sooner, Naomi said, her voice steady. Yeah, I said, shame in my throat. I thought leaving before things got serious would spare us both the pain. But I only spared myself responsibility. Mira babbled something soft and unintelligible, then reached again, this time catching the lapel of my blazer and tugging gently. Naomi glanced down and then up at me. She likes you, she said. She doesn't know me, I replied. She still likes you. Silence stretched between us. The overhead speaker announced final boarding for Lisbon. Naomi tensed again. We have to go. My body moved before I could think. Don't. Naomi froze. Graham, not forever, not for me, for her, for Mira. She closed her eyes. The boarding pass in her hand crinkled. What are you asking? She said. Time. A chance. A chance. Let me prove I'm not the man who walked out that day. Prove it how? You can't fix this with money or apologies. I know, I said quickly. I'm not offering money. I'm offering me. Whatever that means now. Whatever it takes. She studied me, eyes narrowed. Mira was playing with the zipper on my jacket now, completely unaware of the emotional minefield exploding around her. One night, Naomi said quietly. There's a hotel nearby. I wasn't going to stay, but she needs dinner, a bath, familiar smells. I nodded, swallowing a knot of relief. But just one night, she added. You get a room, separate rooms. And if you even think about using this as a pitch or a guilt trip, we're gone by morning. Understood. She adjusted Mira again and looked at me, really looked. I'm not promising anything, Graham. You already had a chance. This time you're walking into my life, not the other way around. I'll earn it, I said. Naomi turned and walked toward the baggage claim. I followed, not close, but not far. Mira peeked over her mother's shoulder, her eyes locking with mine. And just like that, I took my first step, not as a CEO or a man chasing legacy, but as a father, trying to catch up to the family I didn't know I had. The hotel was quiet, the kind of quiet you don't realize you've missed until you're standing in it with your heart pounding and your mind racing. Naomi checked in first, calm, composed, fully in control. I followed behind like a man on probation, which, in a way, I was. She requested connecting rooms. Not out of sentimentality, but logistics. Mira would need her, and Naomi wasn't about to let me play house just because the baby reached for me in an airport terminal. I respected that. The suite was simple, clean, 2 beds in each room, a shared door between us, no confusion about boundaries. Naomi unpacked quickly, pulling out formula, pajamas with little moons and stars, a worn stuffed elephant, and baby wipes. Mira, still energized from the airport commotion, squealed as she crawled across the carpet like she owned the place. She didn't know she'd missed a plane today. She didn't know her life had nearly changed continents. She didn't know her father had shown up 13 months late. But she knew how to laugh. And somehow, she knew how to make it feel like grace. Naomi changed her on the floor, speaking gently to Mira in a rhythm so natural it felt like music. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped between my knees, trying to remember the last time I saw anything that pure. Probably never. She needs dinner, Naomi said without looking up. There's a restaurant downstairs. They have high chairs, I checked. You hungry? I nodded, already 2 steps behind. Yeah, I could eat. She paused. They're not going to have filet mignon or handcrafted mushroom foam. I'll manage, I said with a half smile. As long as they serve mashed bananas in warm bottles. Something in her mouth twitched, like a smile almost escaped, but she swallowed it. Close enough. We walked down together. Naomi pushing the stroller, me holding the diaper bag like it was the most important briefcase I'd ever carried. The dining room was half empty, dim lighting, soft piano music, a few couples, a businessman nursing a whiskey, a waitress who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. We got a corner booth. Naomi ordered grilled chicken and vegetables for herself, sweet potato puree for Mira. I got pasta, though I barely tasted it. Mira, meanwhile, decided the best place for her puree was my shirt. "She likes you," Naomi said flatly, not even bothering to hide her amusement this time as she wiped orange mush off my sleeve. "Apparently." "She has a good arm," I muttered, flicking a splatter from my lapel. "She's practicing for Olympic chaos. She's nailing it." Naomi smiled then, a real one. Just for a second. But I saw it, and Mira, as if responding to the mood, let out a soft hiccup laugh and promptly fell asleep in her high chair, face down, cheeks squished like little dinner rolls. I reached for her instinctively, uncertain, but Naomi didn't stop me. I cradled her gently, marveling at the way her entire body went limp with trust. She was so small, so warm. The smell of her lotion and baby powder filled my lungs like oxygen. I didn't know I'd been missing. Back in the room, Naomi bathed her, then changed her into the moon and stars pajamas. I watched from the doorway, memorizing the ease with which she moved, the murmured song she sang, the way Mira clapped in response to bubbles in the water. When she handed Mira to me, wrapped in a towel, I froze. "She likes voices," Naomi said softly. "Just talk to her. Doesn't matter what you say." I cleared my throat and looked down at the bundle in my arms. Mira blinked up at me, clearly still processing who this new person was. "Hey there," I whispered. I'm Graham. I'm your dad." The word sounded foreign. Not wrong, just unused. Like a favorite jacket that had sat in the closet too long. Mira stared, then reached up and touched my face and smiled. Later, after she was asleep, miraculously without protest, we both sat on the floor of my room, leaning against the bed. Naomi had a glass of water. I had my thoughts. "She does that humming thing every night?" I asked. Naomi nodded. "Since she was 2 months old, colic. She wouldn't sleep unless I walked around the apartment humming anything. Beatles, Stevie Wonder, commercial jingles, didn't matter. Now it's part of her routine." "She recognizes that?" "She recognizes rhythm, comfort, repetition." I nodded slowly, processing it. "She's smart." "She is." Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't awkward. It was full of things that had nowhere else to go. "She said her first word 3 weeks ago," Naomi said suddenly, voice low. "It was Mama?" We were in the kitchen. I was scrambling eggs, her favorite. She looked at me from her high chair and just said it, clear as day. I smiled, then felt it catch in my chest. "She took her first steps at Mrs. Delacroix's," Naomi added. "Our neighbor. I was late for my catering shift. She had a toy stuck under the couch and just let go and walked. 3 tiny steps. Each milestone landed like a blade. And I missed it all," I said. "You did." I looked over. Naomi wasn't angry. She was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that didn't show on skin but lived deep in bones, and she had every right to be. "I didn't want to need you," she said after a beat. "But for a long time I did. Not for money, not for comfort, just so someone else would know what it felt like when she had a fever or smiled for the first time. Someone who loved her as much as I did." "I didn't know," I said again. Weak, I know, but it was true. Naomi set her glass down and pulled her knees to her chest. "She started clinging to me at daycare drop-off a few weeks ago. Separation anxiety. Pediatrician says it's normal. But today, what she did at the gate with you, she's never done that. Not with anyone. Not even Mrs's. She knew," I whispered. Naomi looked at me, and for the first time all day, there was something new in her eyes. Not trust. Not yet. But the beginning of something else. Possibility. "She's asleep," she said finally, glancing toward the connecting door. "Should I check on her? She'll wake up if she hears a door creak." I nodded. "She's safe," Naomi added, softer now. "That's all that matters." And I believed her. For the first time in 13 months, I believed we might be more than 2 strangers bound by biology and regret. For the first time, I believed I might be capable of learning, of showing up, of holding on instead of walking away. And if Mira, in all her tiny wisdom, could choose me today, maybe I could learn how to choose her. Again and again. Every day. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Because love, I'm learning, isn't loud. It's whispered in lullabies. Found in diaper bags. Built-in quiet hotel rooms with moon and stars pajamas and mashed sweet potatoes on your sleeve. And sometimes, love is a baby pressing her face to your chest like she's known you her whole life, even if you just met. Mira's cries tore through the hotel walls like sirens just before dawn. I jolted upright, heart hammering, body still tangled in a half-sleep that hadn't lasted long. For a moment I didn't know where I was. Just that something was wrong. Through the thin connecting door, I heard movement. Naomi's soft voice, urgent but steady, the rustle of blankets, footsteps on the carpet. Then I heard the words that made my stomach drop. She's burning up. I was out of bed and through the door before my brain could catch up with my body. Naomi stood by the window, pacing with Mira pressed tightly to her chest. The baby's face was flushed a deep red, her eyes watery, her little hands curled in discomfort. She whimpered softly, a sound so different from the fussy noises I'd heard earlier. This was pain and fear. She has a fever, Naomi said without turning. It came on fast. She was fine at bedtime. Do you want me to call someone? I asked, already reaching for my phone. A pediatrician? An urgent care line? Naomi shook her head. I gave her infant Tylenol an hour ago. It's not helping. She's never had one this high before. Not like this. Her voice cracked, just barely. I saw it then. The fear she kept behind that steady calm. The way her arms were locked tight around Mira, rocking her with practiced rhythm, her lips brushing the top of the baby's head over and over like a prayer. I should have brought the forehead thermometer, she whispered. I stepped closer, trying to remember every article I'd skimmed about baby fevers. What do we do? Do we wait? Do we go to the ER? Naomi looked at me like she wanted to say something, then shook her head again. We wait. Unless it spikes higher. If she starts convulsing or stops eating, then we go. But right now we wait and hold her. I can help, I said. Please, let me hold her. She hesitated, shifting Mira slightly in her arms. The baby whined louder, her whole body tense. She's upset, Naomi murmured. She might not want. Please, I said more gently now. Just let me try. Something in my voice must have convinced her. Naomi carefully passed Mira to me, guiding my arms as if I were learning how to carry something breakable for the first time, which I was. Mira was blazing hot in my hands, her skin clammy, her breath shallow and irregular against my chest. I swallowed hard, terrified. Every instinct in me screamed to fix it, to cool her down, to call someone smarter, more qualified. But I didn't move. I just held her. Hey, little star, I whispered into her damp curls. You're okay? Daddy's here? The words came out before I could stop them. They felt impossibly big, foreign, but right. Mira whimpered again, but she didn't cry harder. If anything, she relaxed, just slightly. Her forehead settled against my collarbone. I began to sway, mimicking the motion Naomi had used so often without thinking. Back and forth, back and forth. A rhythm older than I was, more natural than anything I'd ever done in a boardroom. I was 7 the first time I got pneumonia, I murmured, my lips near her ear. It was bad. I remember it clearly, shivering so hard my teeth rattled. My mom stayed up with me 3 nights in a row. She sat next to my bed and told me stories, rubbed my back, sang old Motown songs until I fell asleep. Behind me, Naomi had gone still. She said, "This will pass. You just have to let the love carry you through the worst of it." I didn't know what that meant then. I think I do now. I felt Mira's breath begin to deepen. Slower, heavier. Naomi stepped forward and reached for Mira's forehead. Her hand hovered for a second, then made contact. She exhaled in relief. She's still warm, but not as bad as earlier. She's settling down. Yeah, she is. The 3 of us stood there in silence, Naomi watching, me swaying, Mira resting, her tiny fingers curled against the fabric of my t-shirt. She's usually inconsolable when she's sick, Naomi said quietly. The fever makes her clingy and angry. She screams until her voice is hoarse. She didn't scream tonight. No. We stood together in that dim hotel room, the city outside buzzing with late-night taxis and streetlights, completely unaware of the small miracle happening 3 stories up. I had never felt this kind of stillness before. Not in yoga, not on beaches, not in silence retreats executives brag about after burnout. This was sacred. Should we put her back in the crib? I asked, my voice low. Naomi shook her head. Not yet. Sometimes it spikes again. I usually hold her until I'm sure it's passed. I didn't sit down. I didn't hand her back. I just adjusted my grip, careful with her head, steady with her weight. She fit perfectly there, pressed against my chest like she belonged nowhere else. Naomi lowered herself into the chair beside us. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. We just sat, the three of us, bathed in the faint light from the bedside lamp as the fever slowly began to break and Mira's tiny breaths deepened into sleep. At some point, Naomi leaned her head back and closed her eyes, and I stood there, heart wide open, wondering how something so terrifying could feel like redemption. Eventually, Naomi stirred. She's asleep, completely. She's not hot anymore, no. She stood and brushed her hand gently over Mira's head. I usually put her in the crib once her cheeks go back to normal, but tonight, I nodded. We can wait. She looked at me for a long moment. Thank you. I shook my head. No, thank you, for trusting me, even a little. Her expression softened. She reached to take Mira, but the baby whimpered in protest, pressing her face tighter against me. I held her a little closer. Let's just give her a minute, Naomi said, her voice barely above a whisper. So we stayed that way a little longer. I had no idea what the next day would bring, whether Naomi would leave, whether I could keep showing up. But in that moment, holding our daughter with Naomi beside me, I didn't think about the past or the future. I thought about now. About the miracle of being needed. About the chance to show up not in grand gestures or dramatic apologies, but in sweatpants at 3 a.m. when the baby's fever won't break. I had spent most of my life measuring success by the size of my office, the number on a contract, the width of a runway for a product launch. But tonight, I learned that success might look more like this. One sick child, one strong mother, one man trying finally to be more than a name on a birth certificate. The morning came too soon. Sunlight leaked in through the edges of the blackout curtains, casting a soft gold across the carpet and the rumpled bedsheets. Mira was still in my arms, her tiny body warm but no longer feverish. Her breathing was slow, steady, peaceful. I didn't dare move. My back ached and my legs were stiff from standing and swaying for hours, but I didn't care. Not even a little. I felt Naomi stir beside us. She had fallen asleep in the armchair, knees tucked to her chest, one hand resting just a few inches from Mira's foot, like she was keeping watch in her sleep. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and sat up straighter. "How's she doing?" she asked, her voice still hoarse with exhaustion. I looked down at the soft curls pressed to my chest. She slept through the rest of the night. Fever's gone, I think. Naomi got up and crossed the room, her palm gently brushing Mira's forehead. Then she exhaled. She's still warm, but not burning. That's good. Mira shifted slightly, making a soft sound that lived somewhere between a sigh and a squeak. Her fingers twitched, and one of them caught on the edge of my shirt collar, holding tight in sleep. She held on to me all night, I said, barely above a whisper. Like she knew I wouldn't leave. Naomi looked at me. Really looked, and something passed between us. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something less sharp, less guarded. She felt safe, she said. I nodded slowly. I didn't know it could feel like this, just being here. Naomi sat back down, closer this time. It's the quiet moments that build it, she murmured. The middle of the night feedings, the diaper blowouts, the moments when you're too tired to think straight and you still show up. I want to show up. She didn't reply at first, just stared at her daughter, then folded her arms and leaned back. You said that last night, she said, and I believe you meant it, but showing up once isn't the same as staying. I know. Good, she said, because this isn't about proving something to me with grand gestures. It's about her. It's about whether you're going to be the kind of man she can count on, for years, not days. I nodded, absorbing each word like gospel. 2 weeks, she said after a moment. I blinked. What? I called the firm in Lisbon this morning, told them there was a family emergency. They're holding the position for 2 weeks. After that, the offer's off the table. 2 weeks. 14 days. Not forever. But a beginning. That's all I'm giving you, she said, her voice soft but resolute. I'm not uprooting her life or mine for a maybe, but I'm willing to give you a shot. Not as a partner, not yet, as her father. I'll take it, I said, almost too quickly. I'll take it, and I'll earn every second. That day, we moved into a small rental home in Oak Park, a temporary place Naomi had lined up before the Lisbon job came through. It was modest, quiet, tucked into a tree-lined street where strollers outnumbered cars and the sidewalks smelled like lilacs. We made up the spare room for Mira. Naomi set up the crib while I assembled a changing table and learned how to install baby-proof locks like my life depended on it. It kind of did. That first evening was chaos. Mira screamed through dinner, tossed half her peas on the floor, and refused her bottle. Naomi looked like she was about 2 seconds from throwing in the towel, and I couldn't blame her. But then, around 7:15, when the lights were low and the bathwater was just the right temperature, Mira settled. Naomi hummed while I held the towel. Mira grinned up at us like she'd planned the whole dramatic day just to test our resolve. She was probably right. After Naomi put her to bed, we sat on the porch steps in the warm dusk, sipping herbal tea like two people who had just survived a hurricane. Because we had. "She's testing you," Naomi said. "I know. She's testing me too," she added with a tired smile. "Every day." I looked at her sideways. "How do you not lose it?" "Oh, I lose it. Plenty. I just wait until she's asleep." We sat in silence for a while. Fireflies blinked in the dark. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked lazily. "I want to learn it all," I said. "The schedule, the routines, what she likes, what calms her down, how to mix the bottle right, how to carry her without making her arch her back like a gymnast. I want to be part of it." Naomi looked at me, and I saw the tiniest glint of vulnerability flash across her face. "You've got a lot of catching up to do." "I know." She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "This isn't a trial to win me back, Graham. You don't get points for pretending to be a dad just long enough to change my mind." "I'm not here for you." She blinked. "I mean, yes, I care. Of course I care," I added quickly. "But I'm not doing this for a second chance at romance. I'm doing it because I looked into her eyes, and I knew I couldn't walk away again. I wouldn't survive it." Naomi exhaled slowly. "Good." The next morning, I woke up to Mira crying. I was already out of bed before Naomi's door opened. We met in the hallway, both of us looking wild-haired and blurry-eyed. I reached her first and scooped Mira up, swaying side to side as Naomi watched. "She needs her bottle," Naomi said. "Warmed, but not too warm. She likes it just below room temp." "I'll get it," I said. Naomi handed me the formula container, and I prepared it like I was disarming a bomb. Mira clutched my shirt the whole time. Later that morning, while Naomi took a call, Mira crawled across the living room floor with single-minded focus. She reached a pile of board books and grabbed one with both hands, holding it out to me. "She wants you to read it," Naomi said from the kitchen. I took the book. It was about a bear looking for his blanket. I read every word like it was poetry. Mira blinked up at me and listened. By the time I turned the last page, she was asleep in my lap. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't going to be a dramatic, overnight transformation. It wasn't going to be about fireworks or life-changing epiphanies. It was going to be slow, repetitive. The kind of love you build on the floor of a living room with soft books and sippy cups and routines you never thought you'd memorize. It was the real kind. The kind I never knew I wanted. The kind I'd die to protect. By day 4, my wardrobe was a battlefield of spit-up stains, juice rings, and tiny handprints that looked like polka dots from a distance. I had stopped buttoning my shirt all the way to the top, stopped checking my email first thing in the morning, and started carrying fruit pouches in my back pocket like some kind of snack vigilante. This wasn't just a lifestyle adjustment, it was a reprogramming. Mira had me on a schedule tighter than any Fortune 500 calendar I'd ever managed. Wake at 6:15. Diaper change. Bottle. Playtime. Nap. Lunch. Nap again. Read. Sing. Dance. Dinner. Bath. Stories. Humming. Sleep. It didn't matter how tired I was. There were no boardroom meetings to hide behind, no PR spin to outsource. Mira's needs were immediate, non-negotiable, and deeply human, and I loved it. I loved the way she lit up when I walked into the room, how she'd crawl over, babbling something that might have been my name, or maybe just banana. I loved the way she'd nestle into my chest with complete trust, like she had decided that whatever space existed between us before she was done acknowledging it, I was hers now. No negotiations. Naomi watched everything like a quiet hawk. She didn't interfere unless necessary, but she didn't step all the way back either. I could feel her measuring my consistency like a clock, ticking through every moment to see when I'd lose focus, when I'd flake, when I'd default to the man I used to be. But I didn't. Not when Mira woke from her nap crying because her stuffed elephant had fallen between the crib slats. Not when she smacked me in the face with a rattle mid-giggle fit. Not even when she smeared mashed avocado into my ear canal with surprising accuracy. I showed up. Every single time. One afternoon, as Naomi loaded the dishwasher, I sat cross-legged on the living room rug, Mira sprawled across my lap, gnawing on a rubber giraffe. "She's heavier than she looks," I said. Naomi, towel in hand, gave a small smile. "That's 13 months of growing without you." Her words landed soft but deep. Not an accusation, just a fact. One of those truths you can't argue with, only absorb. "She said Dada today," Naomi added, quieter now. I froze. She's been saying it randomly for a couple of days, mostly to the dog at the park. But this morning, she said it while pointing at you. I looked down at Mira. She was completely unaware of the emotional earthquake she'd triggered, just happily chewing on a giraffe leg like it was her life's purpose. "She knows," I said softly. "Doesn't she?" "She's starting to," Naomi replied. That night during dinner, Mira dropped her spoon and immediately began to cry. Loud, panicked, like her entire sense of justice had been violated. I reached to pick it up, but Naomi put a hand on my arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Let's see what she does." Mira looked between the two of us, lip trembling, then reached down herself, snatched the spoon from the floor, and handed it to me with a satisfied grunt. I stared at Naomi, wide-eyed. "She's learning," Naomi said, "that not everything has to be fixed by someone else, that she's strong." I nodded, understanding a different lesson entirely, that not every moment needed me to jump in, that sometimes just being nearby, just being there, was enough. Later that evening, after bath time and 2 picture books about talking clouds, I lay Mira down in her crib. Naomi stood beside me, arms crossed, her face unreadable. "I was thinking," I said, "about staying." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Not just for the 2 weeks, I added quickly, "for good. Permanently." "That's a big shift," she said. "I know. Do you even like Oak Park?" "I like what I've found here," I said, eyes flicking to the crib. Naomi stared at me for a moment. "It's not about geography, Graham. I know that too." "Then what's it about?" "It's about rhythm," I said. "It's about the bottle at 6:30, the diaper change by 6:45. It's about the little voice that says, Dada, even when I don't feel like I deserve it. It's about the fact that I've had every kind of success I ever dreamed of, and none of it made me feel like this." Naomi looked like she wanted to believe me. But the shadow of our history hadn't lifted yet. She sat down in the rocking chair near the crib and leaned her head back. "She responds to consistency," she said. "Routine, predictability. She needs to know what to expect." "I can do routine," I told her. She looked at me, tired but clear. "Can you?" "I've been showing up, haven't I?" "For 6 days," she said. "You want a medal for making it to the end of the first week?" "No," I said, smiling faintly. "I want a second week." That seemed to land. Naomi closed her eyes, breathing in through her nose, slow and steady. "When she's teething," she said, her voice a little quieter, "she screams for hours. Nothing helps. She wants to be held, but she'll fight you the entire time. And when she's sick, like that night in the hotel, sometimes the fever doesn't go down. Sometimes you sit there crying with her and all you can do is wait." "I'll be there," I said. "She needs stories at bedtime," Naomi continued, eyes still closed. "Even when she's too tired to listen. And when she wakes up from nightmares, which she does often, she needs someone to hum to her. Not sing, just hum." "I'll hum," I whispered. Naomi opened her eyes and looked straight at me. "And what happens when your old life calls again? When a meeting in Tokyo overlaps with bedtime? When your phone buzzes with $1,000,000 deals while she's screaming because her bottle's too warm?" "I don't take the call," I said. She studied me. "You used to." "I'm not him anymore." Naomi didn't respond, but she didn't argue either, and that was something. Later, while brushing her teeth, she caught me swaying outside Mira's door. No music, no noise, just me, rocking gently in place out of instinct. "You're still doing it," she said. "What? The motion?" I paused, embarrassed. "It's automatic now." Naomi gave a small smile. "That's how you know it's real." We ended the night quietly. No long conversations, no grand pronouncements. Just her on one side of the hallway, me on the other. A baby asleep between us. And a silence that felt less like an ending and more like the space right before something begins. In the dark, I lay awake and listened to the baby monitor. Every sigh, every shuffle. I wasn't thinking about the product launch I was supposed to be prepping for. or the emails piling up unanswered. I was thinking about Mira's laugh when I tickled her belly, about Naomi humming low in the kitchen while packing lunch, about the way our hands had brushed earlier while reaching for a fallen spoon, and neither of us had pulled away. I didn't know what the next week would bring, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't leaving. Not again. By the end of the first full week, the rental house no longer felt like a temporary detour. It felt like a beginning. Not because the walls had changed, or because the furniture matched, or because the cupboards were suddenly stocked with organic snacks and teething biscuits. It felt like a beginning because something in me had shifted. I stopped watching the clock. I stopped thinking in exit strategies. I started thinking like a father. We didn't talk about Lisbon after that second call Naomi had made. The job was still there, waiting like a safety net she refused to roll up. But the urgency had softened. Naomi never said so aloud, but I saw it in the way she unpacked one more box each day, in the way she hung a photo of Mira in her bedroom, in the way she didn't double-check the clock every morning like she had somewhere else to be. And Mira, God, Mira, she bloomed in those days like something new was taking root. She toddled instead of crawled, stacking blocks in tiny towers and clapping when they fell. She reached for me now, not just in curiosity, but in comfort. If she bumped her head, she wanted both of us. She'd crawl to Naomi, then twist around, searching for me like she expected I'd be close, and I always was. Naomi didn't make it easy. She shouldn't have. She watched me with the quiet vigilance of someone who'd built her life out of sheer grit, someone who had cried alone in the middle of the night while Mira burned up with fever, someone who had balanced spreadsheets with one hand while rocking a baby with the other. She wasn't going to let me stroll in and declare myself whole just because I'd finally shown up, but still, the ice between us thinned. One afternoon while Mira napped, I found Naomi in the kitchen standing over a cutting board, slicing apples for snacks. She said Mira never finished. She was humming, softly, a song I didn't recognize. I leaned against the doorframe and watched her work, her fingers graceful, precise, her mouth moving silently with the tune. "You hum all the time," I said. "It calms her." She replied, not looking up. "Calms me too," I murmured. She paused, glanced up at me. "You're not bad at this, you know." "Parenting?" She nodded, then turned back to her task. "I expected you to fold by day 3, tap out when she threw oatmeal in your face." "I almost did," I admitted. But then she laughed, and I knew I'd take 1,000 bowls of oatmeal in the face just to hear that sound again. Naomi laughed, a quiet, caught-off-guard kind of laugh that softened something deep in her features. I walked in, grabbed a second cutting board, and started slicing cucumbers. She didn't stop me. That night, Mira was inconsolable. No fever, no clear reason, just tears. The kind that came in waves from someplace babies can't explain, overstimulated, overtired, or simply overwhelmed by being so new to the world. Naomi tried first, rocking, nursing, walking up and down the hallway. Nothing worked. "Let me try," I said, gently touching her arm. She looked at me, exhausted. "She won't settle." "Still," I said, "let me try." I took Mira into my arms and walked her into the living room, swaying gently like Naomi had shown me. Her cries didn't stop at first, but I began humming, soft, low, tuneless at first, then the start of something familiar. "Isn't she lovely?" Her cries broke, a hiccup, another. Then silence. She blinked up at me with damp lashes, cheeks flushed from crying, and reached a hand to my chin as if to say, "Okay, you win." I looked toward the hallway. Naomi was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching me with something unreadable on her face. "You remembered the song," she said softly. "She hummed it the night we met," I said. "Back in that bar in Lincoln Park. You had your headphones in, but you were still swaying. I asked what you were listening to. You said, Stevie Wonder, like any woman with taste and trauma." Naomi smiled, that same small, surprised smile I was starting to live for. "I didn't think you remembered." "I remembered everything," I said. She walked over and looked down at Mira, now snuggled against my chest, thumb in her mouth, practically purring. Naomi brushed a curl off Myra's forehead. "She trusts you." "She shouldn't," I said quietly. "Not yet, but she does." Naomi looked at me, long and hard. "I do too, a little more each day." That night, we sat on the couch after putting Mira to bed. A movie played quietly in the background, neither of us really watching. I had changed into a t-shirt that was a size too small because everything else was either in the laundry or smelled like bananas. Naomi had her legs tucked under her gaze soft. "She said Dada again today," Naomi whispered. "Clear as anything. Right after you changed her diaper and you were singing that ridiculous diaper jingle." I laughed. "The one I made up about the poop patrol? That's the one." "She has no standards." "She has a father," Naomi said. The room went still. It wasn't a romantic moment. It wasn't lit by candlelight or backed by swelling music, but it was more intimate than anything we'd shared in years. "Thank you," I said. Naomi looked at me. "For what?" "For letting me earn it. One day at a time," she nodded. "You're doing okay." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how many more days I'd get. Wondering if 2 weeks could undo 13 months. Wondering what it would take to turn a rental into a home. And somewhere between those thoughts, Mira stirred in her crib, let out a soft sound, and settled again. She didn't cry. She didn't reach. She just sighed. Like she was starting to believe I'd still be there in the morning. And for the first time in my life, I didn't just hope she was right. I knew she was. 6 months later, it was the farmer's market that made me realize we'd become a family. Naomi was pushing Mira's stroller down the narrow gravel path between the honey stand and the tomato cart, her hair pulled up in a soft, messy knot that had become her signature since Mira decided sleep was optional. I walked a few steps ahead, waving at Mrs. Rowland from the orchard booth, who insisted on giving Mira a free apple every Saturday. Mira squealed in delight when she saw me, her sticky fingers pointing toward the crate of peaches like she was directing traffic. "Dada," she shouted with glee, and I swear the people around us turned to look, not because of her volume, but because of how confidently she said it. Like she'd always known I was hers. I crouched beside the stroller and grinned. "What is it, little star? Are we peach shopping now?" She answered by thrusting a drool-covered teething ring at me and yelling, "No," with the kind of delight only toddlers can conjure when saying their favorite word. Naomi laughed behind me, that low, warm sound I'd come to crave. "She's been on a roll today. Told the mailman no, told the neighbor's dog no, and told the yogurt pouch no, right before squeezing it all over the floor." "She's developing boundaries," I said, straight-faced. "She's developing chaos." "Same thing, isn't it?" Naomi nudged me with her elbow as I straightened. "She's definitely your kid." And just like that, I felt it again, that quiet shift, that gravity I'd come to recognize as belonging. There was no fanfare, no grand declaration, just a moment in the middle of a Saturday where everything was still and full. We bought peaches, a few loaves of sourdough, and one of those oversized sunflower bundles Naomi always claimed were too impractical, but bought anyway. Then we made our way to the ice cream stand near the edge of the park. "After lunch," Naomi reminded as we approached. "Absolutely," I said. Mira blinked up at me, then immediately started chanting, ice cream," in a sing-song voice that turned heads. "You traitor," Naomi muttered. "I don't make the rules," I said, lifting Mira from the stroller and setting her on my shoulders. She squealed again and grabbed 2 fistfuls of my hair. Naomi rolled her eyes. "You're wrapped around her little finger." I glanced up. "You're just jealous she likes me more today. I'm the one who gets puked on at 3 a.m., so yes, she absolutely likes you more today." We walked through the park like that. Mira riding high, Naomi by my side, the 3 of us winding through lazy paths under tall oaks and golden light. Parents chased toddlers, teenagers played frisbee, someone played acoustic guitar near the benches. It was the kind of idyllic backdrop I'd always dismissed as too simple, too domestic, too permanent. Now it felt like heaven. When we got home, I opened the gate to the little craftsman house we'd decided on together. It wasn't huge, and it wasn't fancy, but it had a front porch wide enough for evening talks and a backyard just big enough for the swing set we assembled one weekend while Mira napped in the shade. She'd taken her first solo steps on the hardwood floors inside. Said Dada for the first time in the kitchen, her fingers sticky with pancake syrup. She'd had her first nosebleed in the hallway after colliding with the laundry basket, and we both panicked like amateurs while Naomi calmly grabbed a tissue and said, "This is why we don't run with toy trucks." Inside, Naomi peeled Mira's shoes off and set her loose in the living room. The little girl waddled over to her books and pulled out the one with the fuzzy bear on the front, flipping it open upside down like she was deep in research. I leaned in the kitchen doorway, watching them. Naomi met my eyes. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah. Just taking inventory." She raised an eyebrow. "You ever think about Lisbon?" I asked quietly. She looked down, then shrugged. "Sometimes, but it feels like something that belonged to someone else. Like a story I almost lived, but didn't." I stepped closer. "And this one? This story?" She met my eyes. "This one's still being written." Mira ran over at that moment, thrusting the fuzzy bear book into Naomi's lap and shouting, "Read it," like a pint-sized CEO issuing executive orders. Naomi scooped her up and settled on the couch. Mira nestled in her arms. I sat beside them. Naomi opened the book and began to read, and Mira leaned into her, eyes wide, cheeks flushed, hair curling around her ears like little commas. I watched the way Naomi's fingers gently smoothed the pages, the way Mira's tiny hand gripped her thumb. Every detail etched itself into me like a vow. When the story ended, Mira turned toward me and said, "Your turn," like it wasn't a question. I took the book and started again. Later that night, after Mira was bathed and asleep, Naomi and I stood in the kitchen loading the dishwasher. The domestic rhythm of our new life felt as natural as breathing now. "I love you," I said suddenly. Naomi didn't freeze. She didn't deflect or make a joke. She just turned and looked at me with a softness that had taken months to return. "I love you too," she said. "But not like before. Not that chaotic, desperate kind of love we used to chase." "No," I said. "Something quieter. Something stronger," she replied. We didn't kiss. We didn't make promises. We just stood there, both of us holding the knowledge that love isn't proven in grand gestures. It's in tiny rituals. It's in showing up. In staying. Outside Mira's door, I paused. I peeked in, just to be sure. She was there, sleeping soundly, one hand curled around the stuffed elephant Naomi had stitched back together more times than I could count. The nightlight cast a warm, gentle glow across her cheek. I closed the door softly behind me. Some stories don't end with fairy tale kisses or sweeping symphonies. Some end with a quiet hallway, a sleeping child, and the unspoken promise that tomorrow you'll show up again. And again. Because when the people you love start to trust that you'll stay, that's when the real story begins. And this one? We're still writing it. Together. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. If you're still here, it means something in this journey touched your heart, and I want you to know how much that means to us. This story wasn't just about a man, a woman, and a baby. It was about second chances. About what happens when someone finally chooses to show up, not with flowers or grand apologies, but with quiet consistency and a willingness to grow. Sometimes, love doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like staying up at 3 a.m. for a fevered child. It looks like reading the same book 5 times just because it makes her smile. It looks like showing up, again and again. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? What part of this story resonated with you the most? Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story like this one. Your presence here means everything to us. And remember, no matter how late it feels, it's never too late to choose love. We'll see you in the next story.